I'm about to bust you up, sucker.
Hey gang, and welcome back to Small Soldier. In today's video, I'll go over how to construct a resin figure, and I'll also show you how to pre-shade the figure using an airbrush. The figure I'm using for this painting tutorial is Life Miniatures 1/10 scale resin bust. It's Rommel the Desert Fox, sculpted and painted by Sang-Yong Lee, the owner of Life Miniatures. Let's take a closer look at the contents. Here are the goggles. They're super clear and free of any defects. They look really good. Next we have Rommel's head, and you can see it's an incredible likeness, very well sculpted, clear of any air bubbles or air pockets. The resin is smooth and very well cast. And on top here you can see there's a locating tab for the hat and a corresponding plug for the top of the hat, and you can see how well that fits. There's no need for any filler here. It's a perfect fit. And this little tab on the back just needs to be removed, and that's the only piece on the hat that needs cleaning up. The only area on the head that you need to clean up is this tiny mold seam here, which shouldn't be a problem. Everything else on the figure, head and hat so far, is absolutely perfect. And the final piece is the body section. The only part you need to remove is this little resin plug at the bottom of the pedestal mount. Now I really took a close look at these parts with my optivisors on, with my triple loop, and I couldn't find any air pockets, any seams on this body section at all, and I looked hard. The only part, like I said, is that plug on the bottom of the pedestal mount. So I find Life Miniatures is so good at casting resin. It's just a pleasure to clean up before painting. There's not a lot of work to do. You basically scrape off a few little spots and you're good to go. So as good as this figure is, I still thought it could benefit from a little bit of undercutting detail. Now I know that the molding process doesn't always allow for deep undercuts. You just can't get the piece to come out of the mold if you go too deep. So anyway, I thought I would just show you how I add the undercut detail to the figure here. So make sure you've got a brand new sharp blade in your knife, and you just want to go slow and careful, making sure that you're not undercutting too much or scraping into the resin. And here you'll see I'm sort of doing a V-cut to get rid of that extra material underneath the collar. And then I just pull out the extra material with the knife, and then keep slowly scraping underneath that collar just to remove all the excess resin, and then I'll just scrape it away till it's gone. I usually do most of my cutting and removing with a scalpel blade or a knife. You will see a little later on here in the video I do have a couple more tools that I like to use just to help get rid of scratch marks or any kind of scrape marks, or just clean things up around the edges. While I'm working, I like to keep a toothbrush on hand, just to keep the debris out of the channels as I'm scraping through or when I'm making my undercuts. The toothbrush just helps to keep things clean and keep your work area tidy, so you can continue to work without having any kind of obstructions in your way. And I think you'll agree by looking at what I've done here that it does make a big difference to make those undercuts. Especially on something this big, it just gives the bust a little more dimension and believability. So after I've undercut everything, I like to take a little bit of steel wool and just run it into all the joints and the crevices. That'll help smooth things out without making any kind of major sanding damage. I'm using a 000 steel wool here. It works really well to get things cleaned up. There's a bit of steel hair left over at the end, but I run it through a bath of soap water before I put any paint on it. Here I'm using a cuticle pusher. I find they have just the right hardness, that they won't mar the surface, but they're hard enough that they can push out any kind of divots or scratches, light scratches that were put in by the knife or scalpel blade. For getting underneath hard to reach areas, you can just flip the cuticle pusher around and use the wedge side, and that works really well to get into deeper crevices. When removing the pour plugs, I find it's easiest to go in and slowly nip away at the piece until you get it down far enough that you can safely go in with the knife and whittle away until you get the material removed enough that you can go in and take a sanding stick to it to smooth things out. You may still have to remove some material with the blade of your knife just to get things smoother before you go in and start sanding. This Glade wax melter comes in really handy, and I've used it quite a bit for applying decals and also for when I'm sculpting or wet sanding. Once the plug is removed and you get it shaped to where you want it, I'll go in with a tri-grit sanding stick or a very fine sandpaper and just start shaping it even more and using a wet sanding technique, and this will ensure that you get a super smooth surface.
Now the great Romolini will do a death-defying dive into this bowl of soapy water. Silence, please.
Oh, Scheiße!
You magnificent bastard!
Das ist gut! Getting a good sound primed surface on your resin model is always a good idea. I always do it. I know some of you don't, or some haven't in the past. You just go straight over the resin, but I find I don't really want to take a chance on that, being that I'm spending so many hours painting a bust or a figure. I just want it to turn out, and I don't want to have any paint falling off, so that's why I prime. It just gives me peace of mind, and I know paint will stick, and I'll never have a problem with any kind of resin leaching through the paint or anything like that. So your best bet is always to give it a prime. This is the base I'll be using for the figure, and I'm going to do something a little different like I normally do with my bases. Haven't figured out what yet, but it'll be something kind of cool. Just a reminder that you always want your paint to be the consistency of skim milk when you're spraying it, and it's a good idea to test it on the side of the cup for flow before you put it in your airbrush and start spraying. So some of you may know what pre-shading is, and for those who don't, it's basically trying to get your shadows and highlights from spraying below and from spraying above. So here I'm spraying below to create the shadows of the coat, and again here I'm spraying from below to get the shadows on the face, and I'll do that on the hat as well, and then we'll go into highlights next. And this is the same technique as spraying from below, but you're going at it from the top, and you just want to hit those high areas and avoid the shadows as much as you can. So it's sort of like almost a 80-degree angle you're spraying at, and you just want to keep building those up, building the layers up slowly until you get the desired effect you're looking for. Here you can see I have the needle guard removed, and that just helps to get a finer spray pattern for my final round of highlights here. And I have lightened it considerably to pick up just a little more brightness on those high edge highlights. So now that my basic pre-shade is done, I'm going to go in and do a little pre-shading with color. So first of all, I'll be doing the skin tone here. And the object is just to get this looking a little more like flesh as opposed to gray and white tones. And again here from the top, I'm spraying down with a lighter flesh color. And the objective with the initial pre-shade was just to form a roadmap for highlights and shadows. This is the mix I'll be using for the cap to create a field gray. By no means is it the only mix for field gray. There are lots of combinations and there are many shades of field gray. So don't be intimidated or feel shy to experiment and come up with your own. I saw on a forum recently that Mr. Color Leveling Thinner 400 could be used with acrylic paints. So I thought I'd give it a shot here, and it really worked well. From the research I've collected and talking to other German uniform experts, I've determined that the coat is not a leather coat, it is more of a brown trench coat. And I wanted to create a brownish, reddish tinged base for the oils to lay over top. And here we have the finished product. I'm quite happy with the way this turned out, and it should give me a really good roadmap for the oils that I'll be using next. I really hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and if you enjoy the content I'm providing here, please consider subscribing, hit the bell notification, Please leave a comment below and share this video with someone in this great modeling community. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye bye now.